Okay, I think we're ready to start. Um, I would like to welcome you all. My name is David Myers. I'm the Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Alliance and the co-chair of the IUCN WCPA's Sustainable Finance Specialist Group. And today we're very excited to be presenting a webinar for Vital Sites entitled Financing Protected Areas that Deliver for Nature and People. And this is in collaboration with IUCN and other partners. So we have a great webinar for you today. We have we'll have a chance for Q&A after some presentations. And for this webinar, you will be just chatting in the chat. You can put your questions into the chat. Hopefully, at some point, we will be able to let you ask your questions directly, depending on how large a group we are. And so I'm going to start off by a presentation that presents the newly released guidance document, and then I'm going to pass it over to Kathleen Fitzgerald from the Pew Charitable Trust. We'll talk about the fact sheets, and then we have Siska from IUCN Protected and Conserved Area, who will give us examples on finance from the Green List process. So very excited for the webinar, and I will start my presentation in a second here. So hold tight. And um, it's gonna maybe need to switch screens. Actually, that looks good, right? So tell me if I'm giving the presentation mode. All right, so very excited to share with you the release of the practice guidance for protected and conserved area finance. This has been an incredible collaborative effort from a whole range of authors and collaborators. You can see the authors on the screen here. The document can be downloaded from the IUCN WCPA's Good Practice Series website, and maybe Yen can post that in the chat so people can click through and download that. We also had a range of fact sheet authors that were just sensational and provided additional guidance on different finance mechanisms. There were a range of reviewers and editors. We obviously want to thank the different funding sources, the designers, IUCN Publishing, a whole range of actors that went into this, which were really essential. The guide is divided up into 8 different chapters. I'll give you an overview of these different chapters and sort of some insights, but highly recommend that you download and read the guide itself. It has a rich set of resources and links to other resources online. Um, and um, and then, as I mentioned, Kathleen will talk a little bit about the fact sheets. And
Apologies, David. Could you just swap the display as we see your basically the speaker notes?
absolutely can. Thank you for mentioning it. Uh,
Perfect.
okay, great. So excellent. So again, we have the different chapters here. I'm going to give you a bit of insight into each one, so no need to read through this slide. Um, the guide starts off with some key principles for protected and conserved area finance, and I'm summarizing them here. To think about the diverse values that we use to think about nature and respect that diversity of values. This is very important for trying to understand and make sure that finance is equitable and addresses a range of issues. That it should be rights-based in both the design and implementation of conservation finance solutions. Good governance is essential throughout all different mechanisms, and that should be designed into the structures themselves, assuring accountability and transparency. Strong institutions are essential for almost every conservation finance mechanism and solution out there. So it's important to build capacity and assure that long-term effectiveness. We encourage taking a systems approach. Biodiversity, of course, is integrated into so many different sectors, and if you try to focus only on a narrow approach, you're likely to cause more problems than you try to solve. Comprehensive collaboration, this is a way to assure a balance of trade-offs and assure that you're engaging with a broad array of stakeholders. A portfolio approach, try to build a diversified portfolio of financial solutions because that assures stability, assures financial adequacy, and no one solution is going to solve any of your protected and conserved area finance issues. And then think about effectiveness. But financial solutions should be both effective and efficient. A lot of them can take a lot of effort, so try to minimize it. So those are the key principles, and we recommend that you think about them throughout the process of designing and implementing conservation finance mechanisms. So diving into the different chapters here, the first chapter is Case for Protected and Conserved Area Finance. And we start by reviewing a bit of where finance currently flows to biodiversity and conservation. And this graphic shows a division between sort of public sources of funding and more private sources. And you can see that public sources of funding dominate the funding for biodiversity in general globally, that some of the private sector approaches, even philanthropy and NGOs, they account for a relatively small amount. These numbers are in billions of dollars, and they're roughly sort of annual spend. So it's been estimated that there's about $200 billion spent annually for nature, much less for protected areas. Um, as you can see, some of that is for a range of things. Um, and, this is a bit dated here, but it just shows that this is the case for protected areas as well. Government budgets are roughly 60% up to 80% of sources of funding for protected areas, protected and conserved areas. Other sources like self-generated revenues are relatively smaller, about 11% here. This is for Latin America and the Caribbean. And another example from the guide here is comparing a few parks. You can see how for Mauritius, South Africa, and Kenya varies enormously about the different sources of funding. So, Mauritius was predominantly government funding, whereas South Africa and Kenya were predominantly self-generated funding. So it really depends on the site and the country, but for the most part, in general, government budgets are hugely important. In terms of the return on why, is investing in 30 by 30 in protected and conserved areas beneficial? Consistently high economic returns. The distribution of that value is not equitable necessarily, and the money that's generated from the economic value and the financial returns from protected and conserved areas don't always get used for nature conservation, so that's something to think about. Waldron and colleagues did an analysis that they published back in 2020 about 30 by 30, and they showed that direct benefits are likely to exceed the cost by at least 5 to 1. That's a 5 times return on investment, and these are economic returns. But they also indirectly should create a range of permanent jobs in conservation and related fields, as well as safeguarding millions of jobs in tourism, fisheries, and other natural resource economies. So hugely beneficial. And then there's of course, the benefits to climate as well. So, from 4 to 12% of the emission reductions that are needed to achieve the 1.5%, 1.5 degree growth, which we've already surpassed. Chapter 2 is background on protected and conserved area finance. I'm going to focus a little bit on this in this talk here, and just remind us, we define conservation finance, or finance for protected and conserved areas, quite broadly. So it's mechanisms and strategies that generate, manage, and deploy financial resources and align incentives to achieve sustainable conservation outcomes. So these all these four pieces. It's not just about raising money. This is something we emphasize a lot, but it's how you manage it, how you effectively and efficiently deploy it, and then for the longer term, how you assure that incentives are aligned. There's a whole taxonomy of finance mechanisms that we, uh, we like to talk about. In the guide, there is a detailed table that describes some of this. A lot of the fact sheets cover different finance mechanisms, but these categories show the breadth of approaches. You know, there's public financial management, which I said is a hugely important piece. Obviously, everyone's familiar with grants and other transfers. Economic instruments are those tools helpful to align incentives for long-term conservation outcomes. And then there's financial efficiency, return-based investments, which is the private sector investment, business markets, risk management. And the guide has a table that goes into a bit more detail on some of those categories. There's been over 150 different mechanisms described by the Biodiversity Finance Initiative, for example. So there's quite a number of finance mechanisms out there, and it can be quite overwhelming to navigate your way through. So we hope that the guide provides help on that and help to protected and conserved area managers and system managers for that. So I talked about the principles, which are sort of in the center here, but we have four uh, guidelines that we are going to be talking about here that help guide the whole document. And here they are: optimize resource efficiencies, discourage harmful actions, incentivize positive actions, and increase capital for conservation. You can see that increasing capital or financial capital for conservation is only one of the approaches that are essential. So let's dive a little bit more deeply into these four practice guidelines. Again, this sort of structures the guidance from the document. So, you know, in terms of optimizing resource efficiencies, how do you achieve the greatest conservation impact with the resources available? How can you make sure that every dollar that you have goes for improving conservation outcomes? The second is discouraging harmful actions. How do you disincentivize the actions that harm nature? The third, incentivizing positive actions. How do you align those incentives for those long-term positive outcomes? And finally, increasing that financial capital for conservation, mobilizing additional funds. So just going to dive a little bit more deeply into each one of these. Optimizing resource efficiencies. This is often overlooked, but it's one of the points that people focus on when you talk about business planning for protected and conserved areas. You know, think about how you can achieve the greatest conservation impact with the limited resources. A couple questions to ask: are the current planned activities the most likely to achieve the outcomes that you're desiring? Um, what other actions could you take that might have greater impact, either more rapidly, with lower effort, or with less money? And then are there other actors that are better suited to implement different management and finance actions? For example, are there opportunities for outsourcing, um, opportunities for co-management, engaging the private sector? Protected and conserved areas use outsourced services all the time. So a few things to consider. Again, these alternative actions, outsourcing, partnerships, biodiversity mainstreaming, of course, the whole of government approach. And then oftentimes institutions are inefficient and you want to improve the way institutions are functioning. Guideline B is discouraging harmful actions. And a lot of the costs, a lot of the variable costs for protected and conserved area management are driven by the local pressures on the site. So it's important to try to reduce or mitigate those threats, therefore, in a way, decreasing some of the financial needs for management. If you can reduce the threats, you can reduce the costs. Not always, but in many cases. So this is a very efficient approach. It can benefit a lot from the polluter pays principle. Those that are damaging the site can contribute financially or should be engaged in reducing those threats. And economic instruments such as fees, taxes, fines, and penalties are great tools to move this forward. But also there's a lot of talk now about redirecting or restructuring harmful public subsidies for fisheries, fossil fuels, et cetera. And OECMs, I should point out, are a really interesting approach because they can balance the need for sustainable use of nature with conservation and biodiversity objectives. So whole range of opportunities for that in that space. For guideline C, incentivizing positive actions, here, this is, we have a whole range of stakeholders who have similar interests to the protected and conserved area. So identifying them and trying to figure out ways that they can act in ways that benefit nature. And here again, there's a range of economic tools, but also government fiscal tools, policy mechanisms, and in general partnerships. So a lot of key partners provide in-kind support to conservation that really help us achieve our goals. And then finally, increasing the financial capital for conservation. It's important to increase the availability and long-term stability of funding. We all know that conservation is grossly underfunded. It was estimated by Waldron and all that we probably need about $140 billion a year, let's say, for 30 by 30 to efficiently manage 30 by 30. We're way below that right now. And, the only way to achieve this ambition is to greatly increase the amount of money flowing to nature conservation. Regardless of all the other guidelines, this is definitely a strong need. Where you can align the goals of this increasing capital with those other guidelines, it's a very efficient outcome. And it's important to make sure that revenue that's generated, or at least a significant portion of revenue is generated, is allocated or earmarked for conservation, because oftentimes even generating revenue from tourism, a lot of that money ends up going to central government, for example. So, and then final thought is that conservation, it should not necessarily pay for itself. Sites don't necessarily have to generate the money to cover their costs. The benefits from protected and conserved areas go far beyond the site themselves and feed into the general economy, providing enormous value. So governments are really well positioned to help finance nature conservation. A couple more pieces of guidance here as you go start out on this journey here are these 4 steps here to think that, start from what you know, build from your own capacity, start with existing instruments and sources. Maybe you can improve their effectiveness or scale. Then step 2 would be new finance sources, increasing the number or types of finance sources using the existing mechanisms that you have. For example, if you are currently very good at grant writing, increase the number of donors that you're trying to apply for. If you've, step 3 would be new finance instruments, building on existing finance source types. For example, if you do have tourism at the site and you can go from an entrance fee and add some kind of camping fee or diving fee or additional fees for activities, that would be a way to increase revenue and diversify sources. And then finally, something totally new sources, new instruments, combining them. They often takes time. You need to bring in capacity sometimes, but that helps. Another sort of guiding principle here is to think about the complexity or the cost of the finance solution, and try to choose those as high priorities that are relatively low cost or low complexity, but that have a great impact. Maybe there's some quick wins that don't have huge financial impacts or impacts on conservation outcomes, but they're low complexity. Obviously, those that have that are highly complex or highly costly and a low impact are low priorities. And then maybe you do want to engage in some longer term initiatives that are complex, that need additional capacity, but could produce larger outcomes in the future. A mix of solutions is necessary, as I mentioned before. So think about, financial adequacy, risk management. Obviously, the COVID crisis hit a lot of protected and conserved areas that were dependent on tourism. A diversity of funding sources helps that. Planning, things take longer than you think. Make sure that the sequence is right. And then how do you integrate the different finance mechanisms with your other sustainable development or community-based goals? Okay, the next chapter, chapter 3, is on finance strategy and planning, and there's different levels that you may want to do plans for. At the a legislation or policy-wide level, think about financial legislation and context, but at a PC management authority or national level, maybe you want to develop a finance strategy as a plan. And then for sites specific, that have a general management plan, you want to build on that to do either a finance plan or a business plan at the site level. So the type of plan um, and the scope of the plan depends on what you're doing it for. We provide a process here for finance planning that goes through preparation and process. Really, it's important to remember that the process for the plan is almost as important as the plan itself, how you engage your stakeholders, who you involve, how you think through the solutions. Finance plans should be living documents. You do your situation assessment, finance objectives, looking at your financial needs, but also your specific conservation outcomes. What are you trying to achieve? You build your portfolio of finance solutions with that mix and a portfolio approach. You present it in the form of a business plan or a finance plan or a finance strategy designed for your specific audience, and then make sure you have a good adaptive management and feedback process to make sure that you're focusing on um, improving it over time and adaptive management. There are a range of resources out there. This is another approach from Emerton and colleague Utai, who looked at three different levels like diagnosis, response, and delivery. And there's guidance in the document that shows their approach as well as links to a broader range of site-based approaches. So it's quite a lot of information there. Now, the following chapters sort of look at different sources of funding. So we have public, site-based, donors, things like that. So I'm going to run through these pretty quickly and uh, give you just an idea of what's in here. First off, I just want to mention how important public funding is. Nature is a public good. It's a shared resource. Governments are uniquely situated to capture taxes, fees, and fines from the uses of nature. And so that money should be used for nature conservation. They set the rules of use and damage that creates the incentives for private sector and companies. They can provide, they don't always, but they can provide long-term financial support in terms of public funding, fiscal planning, those annual budgets, important to integrate them in. They can finance scientific research that allows us to set sustainable use quotas and rules and manage and assure the effectiveness of different conservation strategies. It's really important how they set the rules for natural capital use, regulations, rights and responsibilities, who has access, especially the recognition and support for Indigenous peoples and local community stewardship. And then, of course, the country and public level, they make these international commitments like 30 by 30, which are important political drivers. There are a range of different tools available to government, and a few of them are just listed here. We could go into detail on all these, and the guide does drop down into some detail on all those things. It's important to recognize that public sector also works through multi-sector collaboration with the private sector. Tools like sovereign debt, bond and debt conversions require both, public sector and private sector to collaborate. There's a couple really interesting approaches like natural capital accounting and, official aid development that can be integrated. And this is really important, the public interaction with the private sector, financial sector specifically, to get access to capital and to help finance conservation. Just a few more examples here from the way that the public sector and the private sector interact with like market-based mechanisms. And here you have tradable fisheries quotas where the government can set a quota, but the private sector can trade amongst themselves. Things like carbon offsetting, biodiversity offsets and credits, and payment for ecosystem services. Costa Rica's PEZ system was an example of a great public sector approach to working with private landowners, getting them to improve their forest management. A shout out to the Biodiversity Finance Initiative here, a project that is now working in, I think, 130 countries globally, working on assessing their expenditure, policy and financial needs, turning that all into a biodiversity finance plan and supporting some implementation. Um, Incredible success all over the world at that national level in terms of planning. And then each of these chapters has a kind of summary table at the end that looks at the four different guidelines and some of the tools that have been used or are appropriate for that topic there. Chapter 5, international cooperation donors. I think everyone's quite familiar with this. I'm going to not go into detail here. I'm just going to give you a kind of quick rundown of the different chapters here. Site-based finance, really important sources. This is about, revenue generation by local actors. It's something that we don't necessarily think about in terms of financing protected areas, but it really can help improve community relations, decreases the pressures on the resources, and it really can help build a committed base of beneficiaries that can support your conservation outcomes. So it's absolutely essential for success. A quick look at some of the ways guideline D, where you're increasing your financial capital, could be used in that site-based. Obviously tourism user fees, especially when money can be retained at the site level, licenses and permits, sustainable use arrangements, infrastructure and utility easements, getting paid for facilities in the protected area, PES, as I mentioned, carbon credits, crowdfunding, a whole range of different sources. So some great opportunities for site-based. In terms of finance for Indigenous people and local communities, this chapter focuses really on Indigenous people and has some really great resources here. Just to note that, when conservation, I love this quote, conservation is achieved when the relationships and uses that have conserved the lands and waters for thousands of years remain intact or are reestablished. And Indigenous peoples, manage a huge area of land and ocean, and it's important to recognize their past contribution and their current contribution and support that. They're generally shown to be as effective as protected areas in reducing deforestation and conserving biodiversity. And the contributions that Indigenous people and local communities provide to nature conservation has been estimated here at between and almost $5 billion annually. And this includes investments and as well as their indirect investments. There are a range of resources that are available in the guide here. I'm just listing a few here, and there's, of course, links to all these in the document. And I'm going to look at just one guideline here, optimizing resource efficiencies. Here, strengthening governance, sharing learning between funders and recipients, building capacity, bridging scientific and Indigenous knowledge, and direct financing of Indigenous groups and Indigenous intermediaries could really improve outcomes at a relatively low cost. Finally, Chapter 8, before I pass it over to Kathleen, is private sector finance. And I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but private sector, it's important to look at impacts and dependencies of the private sector, the costs and benefits and how they're distributed. The private sector has a huge amount of capital and could invest in nature, but it's complicated. And there's challenges and opportunities with that. So finally, just as an example here, again, we have a summary table that shows some of the different ways that the private sector can be engaged for finance with nature in all the four different guidelines. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Kathleen, and over to you, Kathleen. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. And welcome those of you that have joined a little late. Great to have you. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. And let's see how this goes. Slowly loading into there we go. Emma, does that look right? I'll assume if no one's interrupting me that it does look right. So
Yes, it does.
wonderful. Thanks, Emma. Wonderful to be with everyone today. And for those of you again that joined, the link to this report is in the chat. And as David pointed out, the way that this guidance was developed, the chapters that he outlined is really the context, things that we should consider when you're thinking about finance for protected and conserved areas. And the fact sheets, which I'm going to focus on, are at the end of the report, pages 106 to 199 to be exact. And again, building off of the prior chapters, we developed 16 fact sheets with a number of incredible authors and practitioners who brought their real life experience to these fact sheets. So you'll note that these 16 are diverse and they cover a range of issues from biodiversity credits to biodiversity offsets to debt conversion. So really a great suite of fact sheets that profile what sustainable finance mechanisms are being deployed and how. So I'm going to dive into these, and I want to just highlight that each of the fact sheets, again, put together by dozens of authors and contributors, which was really incredible. Each fact sheet covers 6 things. First is just an overview and a key characteristic of the finance mechanism. 2 is really practical, how to plan for and what are the required elements for that finance mechanism. So again, these are really practical guidance. 3 are the success factors and the risks. So what do you need in order to succeed, and what are the risks that you should consider? Case studies are included in each of these. So for example, in the debt conversion fact sheet, there are 2 debt conversion case studies that are described, again, real practical experience. The 5th component are trends and future directions. So what are things that you should be aware of in terms of where this mechanism is going in terms of the trends? And then lastly, additional resources and references. And David alluded to this and shared throughout the document, there are case studies, there are references for resources. So the guidance is not designed to be the be all of everything. So throughout the document, we refer to other toolkits or other documents that might be of use. It compiles it all into one place. And so for each of the fact sheets, there again are additional resources. So where can you learn more about debt conversion or biodiversity offsets? We provide those links. So I'm going to highlight 3 of the fact sheets. And I'm going to start with the first one. This was the first fact sheet is on entrance fees. And again, the first thing in that fact sheet is an overview, right? So a description of what is an entrance fee and why should this be considered. And so for entrance fees for protected areas, we know that they're charged for access to sites. It's one of the most widely used sustainable finance mechanisms in conservation. So there's a long history, and what this fact sheet does is it profiles the lessons learned from around the world, commonly applied at an individual or a group rate for a specified period of time, so generally 24 hours, but we also profile seasonal passes, like in South Africa, the wild card, and then provide some examples. So for example, in Latin America, more than 50% of the country's entrance fees comprise 80% of the revenue. In Namibia, it's 75%, and in Uganda, 25 to 30%. Second section is how to, and what are the steps that one would look at when thinking about entrance fees, either developing new entrance fees or increasing entrance fees. So the first step is scoping and feasibility. looking at the legal mandate, looking at the baseline conditions that are required for entrance fees, assessing the demand. How much are people willing to pay? Why are they coming? Considering whether charging fees is socially acceptable. This is an important topic as we think about these national assets in countries. Completing a feasibility study, and there are details on what should be considered in that feasibility study. And then looking at revenue retention, and David referenced this, right? How much of that revenue is retained at a national level for the whole system? How much is retained at site level? And I want to stress this throughout the document. We emphasize it's not just about increasing revenue. It's ensuring that revenue goes to the right place. Second step is designing and preparing. So once the feasibility study is done, and if it's determined to be feasible, then developing a work plan and rolling it out. And the third step is launching an adaptive management of entrance fees. One of the things that I really like about all the fact sheets is the required elements, which we were going to call the must-haves, and then success factors and risks. So required elements, what must you have in place in order to design an entrance fee structure that drives revenue back to conservation and community development? And so the 5 that are highlighted here are, you've got to have a good product, an attractive tourism offering. You have to have adequate numbers, either existing or a really clear pathway to get adequate numbers. Compatibility of visitors with the goals of the protected area, ensuring that visitation is in compliance with the conservation objectives. A legal mandate to charge and retain fees for conservation. And lastly, social acceptability. So those are the things that, as you're doing your feasibility study, which again is outlined in the fact sheet, you have to have in place in order to have a successful entrance fee system. The success factor and risks include things like marketing and branding, transparency, regular updating of fees. We've seen across the board some fees where it's been 2 decades before they've been reviewed and updated. Again, revenue retention. And lastly, a lot of discussion about credit card and electronic payment system, right? It helps with visitor satisfaction. It helps with transparency, corruption, as well as staff safety. So there's a section on that in the fact sheet. And then each of the fact sheets, as I said, have case studies that outline where things have gone well and where things haven't gone well. And so I pulled out this one. This is a case study from Botswana National Parks, where in 2019, BioFin, who David mentioned, worked with the government of Botswana to review their entrance fee structure. It hadn't been reviewed for decades. And so what they did was a comprehensive analysis of Botswana, comparing it to the other 9 African countries. They selected 9. They looked at inflation. They looked at a willingness to pay study. They looked at the quality of the infrastructure in parks, and they also did an assessment with stakeholders. Then they designed the fee structure looking at residents, SADC, so South African countries, as well as tourists. And then in 2021, they actually adjusted the fees. And so a great success story for Botswana. The challenge with this success story is about revenue allocation and where that funding is going, which is an ongoing project with the government of Botswana and BioFin. The last section, as I mentioned, is trends and future directions. So what are the things that practitioners should be aware of when you're thinking about entrance fees? So number 1 is the use of digital and mobile payment technologies. There's been a lot of great progress on that. More sophisticated fee structuring, which differentiates different activities, visitors, seasons, duration, seasonal passes, how that's beneficial for the protected areas. And then lastly, ongoing monitoring and research to ensure the regular adaptive management and updating. And then again, the resources. So additional resources that can help you as a practitioner design a system based on best practices. And again, not just where things have gone well, but where mistakes have been made and how you can learn from those. So that's the first example, that's entrance fees. I'm going to give you two more examples. And the second one is fact sheet number 4. And this is on collaborative management partnerships. And again, the overview of collaborative management partnerships. This is a type of PPP that is used when a protected area authority, it can be a public authority, it can be private, it can be a community, enters into a management agreement with either an NGO or a private sector partner to devolve management responsibilities for that protected and conserved areas. This is being widely used in Africa, and case studies have been pulled from 40 CMPs in Africa demonstrating significant economic, ecological, and social benefits. And so this fact sheet draws on work that was done by the World Bank's Global Wildlife Program, which reviewed 40 collaborative management partnerships and outlined a process for establishing successful collaborative management partnerships. So the fact sheet presents the 3 types of collaborative management partnerships. They're bilateral, integrated, and delegated collaborative management partnerships. It gets into the structure, the governance, management, and then also highlights examples. So you can go to those examples and see where it's been applied, what has worked well, and what hasn't worked well. The how to plan for and implement CMPs, again, are 3 steps. Historically in Africa, for example, collaborative management partnerships have been directly negotiated. So for example, if an NGO is working in a protected area, providing financial and technical support, that relationship with the protected area authority has devolved into a more formal agreement. However, the recommendation being made here is collaborating with government and developing a CMP through a tendering process, which is obviously different than a direct negotiation. The reason why that's being recommended here is what we found in looking at the 40 CMPs is, number 1, a tendering process is more transparent. Number 2, it's aligned with the PPP framework in many countries. And number 3, it actually takes less time because the process is clear. So the steps that are outlined in this fact sheet include scoping and feasibility. So number 1, what are the CMPs that might be used within the country? What is the legal framework? Which protected areas may be most suitable for a CMP? And then what are the steps that would be required at a government level? The second step is actually the tendering process. And so it outlines the key steps that are needed for tendering. And then lastly, contract and management of that CMP. So the required elements, the must-haves that are outlined in the fact sheet: clear and transparent process, contracts once the CMP is entered into that are very explicit on roles and responsibility, government support at all level, from the highest level down to the protected area authority level, a shared trust and vision between the partners, a qualified partner. When management is being devolved from, maybe it's a community, private sector, or government protected area authority, ensuring that the devolution of that management is going to a qualified partner is absolutely critical. And then adequate funding for startup and to ensure durability. The success factors and risk Enabling policies are critical. A government strategy. So ideally, if a CMP is being used for a protected area, having a holistic strategy and then thinking about using CMPs strategically within that overall strategy is best case scenario. Revenue retention, and then adequate duration. We've seen that having a CMP for 15 to 20 years is ideal for ensuring, that long-term management and setup of solid operations. There are a number of case studies in the fact sheet. There are 3. This is a case study from Rwanda, where Akagera National Park, the Rwandan government has entered into a management agreement with African Parks. It took 3 years to set up this agreement, which will last until 2030. And the collaborative management partnership is managed through a company, which is comprised of shareholders from African Parks and the government of Rwanda. In the case study, it outlines the data, which is really impressive when you look at the data from this CMP. So I'm not going to go through all these numbers. I'd urge you to take a look at it, though. Between 2010 and 2019, the operational budget has grown from 200,000 to over 2.5 million. Tourism has grown from 15,000 to 50,000. The staff increase, which is a majority from the local communities around the protected areas, have gone from 18 to 273. Community benefits have gone from 0 in 2009 to 600,000 in 2019. Incredible success story. And so I'd urge you to take a look, if you're interested in CMPs, at this fact sheet and the examples. Lastly, trends and future directions. Number 1, there's increasing government interest across the board in collaborative management partnerships. While Africa has been really the pioneer around CMPs, globally we're seeing strong interest from governments in CMPs. Number 2 is donor interest. There's a lot of interest from public and private funders in collaborative management partnerships because of the success. And so even some donors are requiring the existence of a CMP in order to invest in a protected or conserved area. And lastly, private sector. Because of that management agreement, we've found that with collaborative management partnerships, it's incentivized private sector investment, which again contributes to long-term durability. The last example I want to give is fact sheet number 7. And this is a different type of mechanism, and it's called project finance for permanence. A lot of the information from this fact sheet came from the Enduring Earth Partnership, which is a partnership between 4 organizations focused around project finance for permanence, otherwise known as PFPs. So in the overview, it describes what a PFP is, and essentially it's a tool that is used to enable governments, Indigenous people, local communities, NGOs, and funders to secure long-term conservation over a system. So rather than looking at a protected area in a country and then another protected area, what a PFP enables governments, communities, partners to do is say, what does the entire country need for long-term durable finance? And the PFP, the key aspect of a PFP is a single closing. So the planning is done and then funding is released only after the single closing. It's the key aspect of this. I'm not going to go through all of these details, but again, some of the key aspects that are highlighted in the fact sheet include the large-scale impact, the planning that is required, how communities have led or are engaged in PFPs, high-level accountability. So for example, the funding from Project Finance for Permanence does not go directly to the implementing partners. It's managed through an independent conservation trust fund, and then the funding is released based on disbursement conditions. And then it profiles how PFPs have been successful in leveraging finance as well as long-term funding. Again, the fact sheet goes into how to plan for and implement. So very practical steps on what is needed if you're interested in a PFP. And this comes from the Enduring Earth Partnership, looking at ecological viability, political stability, organizational capacity, capital, is funding available, as well as the social aspects. The required elements of a PFP. So again, what are the must-haves when a country or a community is thinking about a PFP? So there are 7 key elements that are highlighted in terms of what is absolutely needed in order to develop a PFP. So a single vision, a holistic deal structure, a high capacity organization to develop it, key partners that can deliver the funding, a financial plan, the fundraising, as well as closing conditions. So these are all outlined. Some of the success factors and the risk, again, these are outlined in the fact sheet. What are the things that enable success of PFPs? So strong national governance, political commitment, clear expectations of all stakeholders, and then sometimes a deal broker is used, which has contributed to success factors. There are 2 case studies that are profiled in the fact sheet. So this is one example of a PFP, which was executed in Colombia in 2022. This PFP will leverage 32 million hectares of terrestrial and marine protected areas, so inside and outside the formal protected area system. This PFP was designed with the government of Colombia to help them achieve their 30 by 30 strategy, and it leveraged significant finance to deliver that. Lastly, trends and future directions. We're seeing significant interest in PFP as a mechanism to help scale up conservation and durable finance. There were 3 PFPs that closed last year that were wholly Indigenous-led PFPs, incredible examples of Indigenous leadership. There's strong government interest around the world in PFPs. And lastly, there's very strong interest in donors in PFPs because it creates a durable finance mechanism for conservation and community development. So I'm going to leave it there. I know that was a lot of information, but again, the guidance really focuses on practical examples of finance mechanisms, and we hope that the fact sheets give you just that. Thanks, David. Over to you.
Thanks, Kathleen. Really great, great overview and great examples. So thank you for that. I'm happy to pass it over to Siska Simbing, who is the Senior Program Development Officer for IUCN Green List and part of the Global Protected and Conserved Area team. Siska, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. So my name is Siska Sihombing. So I'm part of the IUCN Protected and Conserved Areas team, Senior Program Development Officer for the IUCN Green List. I'm here now with Camille Lau, my colleague, so young professional, also has a background on sustainable finance as well. So yeah, thanks so much, David and Kathleen, and hi, everyone, to the participants. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Right now. So we learned so much from this practice guidance on PCA. So now we would like just to present the IUCN Green List that is actually quite strongly linked to everything that has been presented by David and by Kathleen, and especially that when it comes to on how the protected areas, conserved areas, any other type of conserved areas are let's say, they need to establish, good governance and effective management in order to achieve a successful conservation outcomes as well. So now, okay, just maybe it's not presentation mode yet. So let me just check again my screen. Yeah, I think that's it. Right. Okay.
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. So for those for those participants who are not familiar yet with the IUCN Green List itself, so why IUCN Green List for protected and conserved areas? So the main mission of the Green List itself is is a standard, it's a global standard to increase and recognize the number of effective, protected and conserved areas globally, terrestrial, marine and coastal, or any other types of ecosystems. So this is, let's say, the global standard for effective, protected and conserved areas. So what does it mean effective exactly? So in the IUCN Green List standard, so we have 4 components, which consists of, first is good governance, and then second is sound design and planning, effective management, and the 4th one, which is the last one, which compile all the good results from the governance, design, planning, and management, which is showcase or demonstrate successful conservation outcomes. So just maybe not going to the details of the IUCN Green List standard itself, is that I'm just going to present some examples of the green listed sites and how the effectiveness is in place, is in action. So we have now a diverse of green listed sites, from Peru, and then from Swiss, and then from Monteverde in Costa Rica. So as you can see here, why they are certified as the IUCN Green List or even candidate is because they are managed and governed in such a way so they're able to demonstrate successful conservation outcomes. So for example, from Amaraikeri, and how both indigenous communal reserve, but also local authorities, they are co-managed. They are co-managing the areas in such a way, and they are able to demonstrate high integrity of all values and also to mitigate any risks, any threats that from external support as well. So it's the same thing. It applies, to any other protected areas, conserved areas that are green listed. So we have now, for example, Swiss National Park, how they demonstrated the management of natural process and ecology, and Monteverde, and so on. So the one side that I also am quite familiar with is one of the example in Malaysia, which is the marine protected area, is a private island, but also they have been working since a long years, in order for them, to protect and to conserve the endangered marine species that live, of course, endemically, but also some migratory species as well in and around their Sugut Island marine conservation areas. So this is just one example of how the IUCN Green List standard can help improve and can help, let's say, show progress from one side, and also to make sure that the connectivity is also effective. And so, yeah, so as you can see, an example that there are some stages that the Green List process will support, from registration phase to also until the Green List pathway itself. So it's certification phase. So this is one of the really good example when they are really strong in terms of the ecotourism, and how they can also build a financial governance, business model, revenue models, basically to support the whole management and the whole governance structure and implementation in their areas as well. So yeah, just very quickly regarding the mapping of the green listing sites, but also the engaged sites. So we can all see here that, yeah, we have over 500 engaged green list sites, but also over 200 certified sites, including the biggest sites for now, so from the California MPA. So we have now 98 listings, meaning that the protected areas and conserved areas that are green listed so far. So yeah, just to, to thank also our green list partners who have been really supporting strongly the green list program in the world. So yeah, so back again to the, why the green list is also a really, really good pathway to verify the effectiveness of outcomes, but also what's the link exactly to verify those outcomes, and what is the link to the potential investment or any other, support the financial governance of protected and conserved areas as well. So as we know that it is, of course, great, and it's mandatory to, for protected and conserved areas to have at least good governance and effective management. But the good governance itself, sometimes the site itself, the site managers would really only focus on the implementation of biodiversity outcomes. But actually, financial governance is as important as let's say, the management of the protected conserved areas itself, because without any, good revenue models, and as we have heard as well earlier from David and Kathleen, is that the good governance and how also the financial models for the site itself is inclusive, and also, trying to approach as well, bottom top approach, and especially when it comes to PCA, or protected conserved areas, the sites where the local communities, indigenous peoples, but also rights holders and stakeholders are strongly involved in the implementation of the PCA itself. So that's where the green list standard is very interesting to look at, because this is, again, evidence for conservation outcomes. So any other, any types of ecosystem, marine, terrestrial, freshwater, protected and conserved areas, they must provide evidence against all components and indicators to verify their conservation efforts, regardless the tracking tool or any other tool, effectiveness tool that they are using. Most of the financing mechanisms, they require independent verification, success measurement. What does it mean being successful as protected areas, as conserved areas? So this green list process, through the standard and its components, its indicators, they provide an easily audited evidence trail, which is fully independent. That also allows for independent verification of the outcomes as well. So yeah, just back to that effectiveness outcomes, that is, proof of evidence, evidence-based process as well. So this ambitious outcomes-based financing mechanism could generate the substantial funding required for countries. So that allows increasing the coverage of PCAs that are managed effectively. Again, link back to 30 by 30, target 3, GBF, when, we would like the countries will protect and conserve areas, their areas to 30% by 2030. But again, we're not talking about the quantity only, but also the qualitative aspects of the PCAs itself, and how they can perform to be much more effective. So when we're talking about that, as also, we've heard a lot from this practice guidance, is that for that, we need, of course, to have the site managers and site management, they need to have a really good financial governance, cost effectiveness as well, and how they can optimize all the costs that they spend in order to have the optimized outcomes, conservation outcomes itself. So by using this the green list standards, so the credibility of this standard and independent assessment process will also sufficiently, let's say, trigger a payment, or even prove the evidence for payment for results mechanisms. So the verifications provide financial institutions who are interested, let's say, in investing in some areas. So decides, and this verification process can actually guarantee or, let's say, provide a high degree of confidence in conservation impacts of their investments. So just some examples, outcomes-based financing mechanisms. So yeah, with our colleagues and with our experts as well, that we are also exploring on how the green list can support the investment for effectiveness outcomes on PCAs. When it comes to the IUCN green list standard, it can help design investment programs to deliver conservation outcomes. And again, the independent verification process of the green list can help track performance of investments such as in bonds, and in any other outcomes-based finance mechanisms as well. So we have some examples here. So Belize Blue Bond in Belize and Coral Reef Bond in Indonesia as well. So just sharing the first case study, we have there is a Belize Blue Bond that is part of the conservation agreement in Belize. It was launched in 2023. So as we can see here, for example, it is very interesting to see and how, the green list as the standard for effective, protected and conserved areas in Belize is one of the success milestones for the Belize Blue Bond itself. And there is some specific milestone, which is at least 3 Belize marine protected areas applied and candidated for the green list program. And so far, IUCN is involved in supporting Belize authorities, Belize government, Belize site managers in the green list process, also to support them in achieving this Belize Blue Bond milestones. The second one is also very interesting. This is still under development, under proposal stage. So this is the first, let's say, outcomes-based financing mechanism that is targeting the marine conservation space. So the Indonesia Coral Reef Bond, innovative ocean financing instrument led by the World Bank and supported by Jeff and by BNP Paribas, and also implemented by the government of Indonesia and IUCN as well. So this is the first non-sovereign, non-debt financing instrument for the bond to generate the funding to support effectiveness of marine protected areas in Indonesia for a total of 2 million of hectares in Raja Ampat and also in Alor Sea as well. So the project indicators for this coral bond is that to the select MPAs, there are 3 of them, 2 million of hectares, achieve independently verified its conservation outcomes in line with the IUCN Green List protected and conserved areas, but also the live coral reef fish biomass in those MPAs are also maintained or increased as well. So the IUCN Green List will provide an assured assessment of performance and also express validation of progress of those MPAs in 5 years' time. So yeah, so I think I will then hand over to my colleague, Camilo, who will also present some case studies that are submitted or approved, under the Panorama Solutions, also to showcase and other revenue generation methods as well.
Thank you, Siska. So the Panorama Solutions is a platform that promotes examples of inspiring and replicable case studies. So if you're interested in learning more, you're more than welcome to visit the website. And the following case studies, I would say it relates most to chapter 6 of the practice guide that David shared, more on the site-based level of financial solution. It really showcases how communities, stakeholders, or managers at the local level are some of the most important actors in financial solutions. And when they collaborate with the right actors, for example, government entities or other kinds of supporting institutions, they can also advance in financial solutions and look for the right opportunities as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the first case study is a community eco-credit pilot scheme in Tanzania. I will not be able to pronounce the program name, but it means fun to steward the sea in Kiswahili, if anyone wants to challenge that pronunciation. But this is very interesting because the target group of this pilot project are people in remote areas without formal credit history. And usually they would have a lot of difficulty in accessing any kind of form of credit from traditional banking systems. And how this program works is the Eco Credit Pilot Scheme is actually embedded in a wider project that aims to build more effective co-management framework to strengthen and support the local marine resource management institution called World Fisheries Committee. And they create the community level marine management plan, which not only sets the priorities and objectives to manage natural resources there, but also serves as a guidance for the environmental compliance and actions to be taken by the eco-credit group's members. And essentially, an initial grant was provided, and it created like around 370 community managed loans split into 5 groups divided by their main livelihood activity. And the loans were managed within this community, and they were basically giving loan to each other with a specific ecological or environmental condition. And actually, rates were near 100%, and the loans were used to improve household or income generation that are compatible with local community marine resource plans. So it really shows that even small loans can have great impact, especially to those who were not currently borrowing. They would also be interested in participating in local management and see what's possible. And this project also receives a lot of positive feedback with the request to expand to replicate the scheme in nearby communities. And it also brought other additional benefits like restoring mangrove. Next slide, please. Thank you. The second case study would be the Tahiri Konko project in Madagascar. And part of the challenge of the project was a very extensive, lengthy community consultation with policy-related challenges. However, this is also quite interesting in the sense that the project really tried to engage local community in different stages of the project, and starting from participatory mapping for management, theory of change, trying to understand together what are the drivers and causes of mangrove loss, and also to identify potential strategies or solutions that can reduce threats to mangrove and promote sustainable mangrove use. And then they also had participatory forest management plan, where each of the community, they would determine, agree, and then implement the rules and regulations governing each mangrove zone. And also the monitoring was done in a participatory manner, where they would agree on the set of indicators, how to monitor it. And lastly would be the mangrove restoration work done by the communities, which helps to fund the management that is integral to the LMMA, and also incentivizes this management. So this project returns the annual income of carbon credit sales of approximately 27,000 US dollars for the next 20 years. And of that, around 50% would go to the local villages to support infrastructure construction, education, and healthcare. Around 23% of it goes to the local Marine Management Association that leads the project to support MPA management, and the remainder of it covers the project expenses. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the last case study that I'd like to share is coming from the concept of village savings and loan associations. Essentially, these are small-scale, self-managed groups that meet together and to save money and to access small loans from their own savings. And this is quite interesting because they kind of used this scheme to leverage it, turn it into an environment fund. And it really breaks through the vicious cycle in the Philippines, where there's a lack of financing to support long-term management, which is like a major barrier and threats that the MPAs are facing, and they're caused by weak and unsustained MPA management. And in here, this project really begins with grassroots funding, with impoverished communities taking out a portion of their income to establish the VSLA. And they have conversations to recognize together that the marine environment must be protected, and the associations have the capability to support conservation and protection of marine resources. And then they would set individual contributions and broader goals, and to integrate it into their own group's constitution and bylaws. And then they would turn these broader goals into specific use and utilize the existing management plan as kind of like a shopping list of interventions that their common savings, like an environment fund, can support. And even though this pot of money is quite small in relation to the total financing requirement for effective MPA management, they were able to leverage this pot of money to attract and convince local government to regularly allocate funding for MPA management. So this really demonstrates that even for poor villages, remote communities, they're also able to contribute to conservation initiatives to support and build and tap into financial solutions and to transform themselves into vital stakeholders, as well as leverage this to diminish the threats of financial constraints that limits the capacity of protected areas to achieve their defined objectives. So I think these several case studies are quite interesting. If you're interested, you can look them up on Panorama Solutions. Thank you. So lastly, we would like to invite you to participate and join our activities at the IUCN Greenlist Pavilion at the IUCN World Conservation Congress. So you can register on the IUCN official website, the World Conservation Congress websites. And you can also participate in person or online, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you both, Siska and Camille, for great presentations and great examples. And we are going to move to Q&A now. Questions can be posted in the chat. Please don't hesitate to put your questions there. We already have had a few that we can respond to. We've had one on private sector investments, and then another question on collaborative management partnerships, which maybe we'll start there, Kathleen, on the question of the African parks model and how that integrates rights-based approaches. I think you are the perfect person to address this question.
Sure. Thanks, David. And thanks, James, for the question. Couple of reflections on that. It's important to recognize that the reason why, I'll just focus on governments, the reason why governments have entered into collaborative management partnerships, and it's about 11.5% of the protected area network in Africa, excluding South Africa and Madagascar, because they have a different type of CMP arrangement. The reason governments are entering into those agreements vary wildly depending on the government. So, for example, Rwanda views it as almost the way they would view road maintenance, right? They'll say, why would we not engage with a management partner that can do protected area management better than us? So they've entered into those management agreements for long term, not as other countries. So, for example, Zambia has entered into, I think they have 8 collaborative management partnerships. And the way they're thinking about it is almost a stepping stone to help create the operational structure so that when ZAWA has the capacity, the Zambian Management Authority, to take on direct management, that infrastructure has been established through the CMPs. To your question on rights-based approaches, the examples that we've used here and then in the collaborative management partnership toolkit from the Global Wildlife Program, there are a variety of mechanisms that are deployed alongside CMPs for community engagement. Number one, many of the governance structures, I believe, have improved from 20 years ago to now include communities in that governance structure. So I'm thinking of Lua Plains in Zambia, for example, which is a tripartite governance structure with community, government, as well as the management authority. Another great example, which we profile in the fact sheet, is Ganarejo in Zimbabwe, which also has community governance. The other example I would give, a wonderful example, is Gorongosa in Mozambique. And Greg Carr, of course, has been incredibly influential there. Their whole project is called the People's Park, right? And it's very much based on working outside the protected area in order to ensure the protected area is durably financed. So we've seen a lot of creativity there. And the last comment I'll make is, if you look at an Akagera, which is, it's a protected area that, quite frankly, has a fence on that western boundary. That fence was the result of community requests. They were the ones that demanded that fence because of the human-wildlife conflict mitigation. And so their engagement in the protected area is direct, which is great.
Thank you, Kathleen. Really interesting. All right, so again, encouraging you all to put your questions into the chat. That's how we're going to be able to respond to some questions. So please don't be shy. All questions are good questions. Thanks again, James, for those questions. And there's a question from Desiree that's asking about private sector investments and the relationship with nature-related financial disclosures, citing the Global Biodiversity Framework Target 15. There's been a lot of interest in the TNFD and other disclosures in the European Union. I'm not sure if Kathleen, you want to try to answer that, or should I give it a shot? Or
I think that's perfect for you, David.
Okay, right. So we have been, for the, I would say longest time now, hoping that the private sector would really step up and provide more financing for nature. The private sector benefits from ecosystem services for their supply chains, for, all kinds of benefits that are what are called positive externalities, let's say, of nature. And then companies have also been harming nature in what we would call a negative externality. So a company can pollute a river or cause carbon emissions and not actually pay for that. And the burden falls on the private sector and on communities and on nature. So we definitely want to figure out ways that the private sector can invest more in nature. And there's growing interest in the private sector for that. It's just hard for private companies to invest in nature. A lot of the services and products that nature provides have been either low cost or free historically. And this is where two things, government can come in. Well, disclosure is a really great step in the right direction because it forces companies to identify their impacts and dependencies on nature. And in doing so, they begin to measure it and begin to understand how they're dependent on nature. The World Economic Forum has estimated that somewhere over half of global GDP is in one way or another dependent upon nature. And so we have really strong, business has really strong dependencies on nature, but they don't have the right incentives necessarily to invest or pay for that dependency. So disclosure is great. Transparency is really important. It's a step in the right direction. But ultimately, um, other than investing in supply chains, which is something that a lot of companies do, to secure their supply chain and reduce price volatility for their products, um, without government kind of regulations coming in and encouraging that actual investment from the private sector, it's going to still take a while for the private sector to really ramp up to the levels that we would like to see. So that's my assessment of that. Let's see, we've got a question here. Oh, the question is there a plan on training on the content of the practice guidance for protected and conserved area finance? Yes, there's a desire to do that. We actually are working with IUCN and their MOOC program, massive online massive open online course for Africa for protected areas. It's a very toned down version of this. So it's not really a detailed version of this, but we are looking for, opportunities to do more capacity building on this. So if you have any suggestions, we're definitely open to do that. A question about faith-based financing. So again, maybe I don't know if Siska, you want to respond to that a little bit, if you know anything about it. I know you'd mentioned the Coral Bond was a non-sovereign, non-debt-based instrument. Maybe you can explain what you mean by that and how it differs from the Rhino Bond, for example, which is more of a debt instrument, and be curious.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think we saw also some questions from the audience, so from James. Yeah, thanks again. Indeed, that the ideas of the Coral Bond itself is that they are really focusing on, let's say, 3 specific marine protected areas that are not necessarily and physically connected each other because it's quite far away in terms of the distance. But indeed, the idea of the green list itself is to look at the systems. So from where that's, the MPA network, as we know that the connectivity in protected areas is very, very important. So that's why also that, let's say in some other partnership that we have, and to look at the seascapes level together with other Southeast Asia and Pacific countries under the Coral Triangle. So it can really help deliver the larger scale of financing itself. So it's not only, one shot and then that's it, but the idea is really to take lessons learned from this, let's say, bond mechanism, and to look at how we can support the countries, let's say, to replicate this mechanism in other countries as well. So the difference is between, let's say, they will apply for this non-sovereign bond, and actually it is fully inspired by the Rhino bond itself. Because between a Rhino bond and Coral bond itself, they're targeted the specific species. Rhino bonds is rhino, but then the coral reef bond is basically reef fish biomass and how healthy it is, their coral reef systems as well. On these MPAs. So how the Coral Bond works as well, it's still actually under the finalization, but as we know that it's non-sovereign bond, it's simply because it's not, it's something that the government of Indonesia also will receive as a funding, let's say as a grant. So basically the investors will forego the coupon payments from the bond itself when it's when it's sold, and then this forego will then instead direct straight into the conservation work for these three MPAs, and to make sure that they achieve the indicators of the bond itself, which is to increase the live reef fish biomass, in those 2 million hectares of reefs as well. So then there will be also at the end of the bond term, so the investors normally will receive their principal back, but also they will also receive, let's say, it's called a conservation success payment, but only in the case where those MPAs demonstrate the successful outcomes, successful indicators, which are the reef fish biomass increased or maintained, but also supported by the IUCN Green List process itself, to demonstrate the effectiveness of those MPAs. And that also looks at not only the governance and management of itself, but also how the MPAs will showcase the increase of the key species and natural and ecological values of those MPAs itself. So yeah, that's very interesting. It's still under concept, and the World Bank is leading it with the government of Indonesia. And this is really something very interesting to see how the private investors can return into can, let's say, direct or redirect their investment into conservation results. Rather than nothing else.
Thanks, Siska. So quite similar to the Rhino bond, World Bank issued bond, so it's not a sovereign debt issue. Okay, great. See a couple other questions. A question about capacity building mechanisms. So I'm not sure we have anything to offer right now, but we will be trying to develop that over time. Another question about institutionalization of protected area and protected and conserved area finance based on political instruments, and what's the experience of that? Kathleen, I don't know if you want to give that a shot. Yeah.
Sure, it's a great point, Rodrigo, in terms of creating the right institution to support these mechanisms long term. So really important. It is included throughout the report. So for example, the section on developing a business plan, of course, looks at that institution, of course, that has to underpin that business plan. And then, so there are components in the report on that. And then in terms of particular mechanisms, Rodrigo, for example, the example I gave of a project finance for permanence very much builds in that financial model, the institutional structure that is needed. And the indigenous-led PFPs that I mentioned, for example, one of them actually almost built up from the ground a new institution to support indigenous-led participation in conservation. So it is throughout the document, and thanks for raising that because it's such a key component of any of these mechanisms.
And I do want to highlight conservation trust funds, which are institutions established to support conservation finance. And the guide does go into some detail on them. There's actually a fact sheet on them. And, they're just an example of how you can use institution, in this case, a non-governmental institution, to establish long-term conservation finance options and build on their initial endowments to look at all kinds of new financing options like carbon offsets and impact investing, and there's a whole range of actions that conservation trust funds are doing now, of course, including being integral to project finance for permanence. And but there's also, it's really important to think about the institutions of government, the agencies who are managing the protected areas, and how they can build their capacity and become key actors in the finance elements too. So we always emphasize how important public budgeting process is for those agencies to make sure that they're supplying the government with the right kinds of budgets at the right time, with the right indicators to capture and assure that long-term government funding. But there's a whole range of other finance mechanisms that those institutions can develop and build their capacity on, and they are doing so all around the world, and are key players for long-term financing for protected and conserved areas. So really an important piece. Okay. We have time for a few more questions. If anyone has a chance, or any of the participants, the panelists have questions or want to share some thoughts that have come up from the presentations, you're welcome to share as well. Yeah, there was a question on, faith-based financing. So this is a very interesting point. And James has made mention of Sukuk, Islamic sort of debt financing. There are rules and regulations in Islamic financing that are very specific, and there's also sort of a annual giving that's encouraged by the religion that could also result in significant investments and donations to conservation outcomes. Traditionally, it's been more social giving, but there's an opportunity there, and great advances being made in Indonesia and other countries to explore these different opportunities. So, looking forward to seeing more coming out of that in the future. All right. I'm seeing another big question or comment coming in there. I do want to, we're somewhat of a smaller group right now, and I know that the plan was to keep the webinar going until the hour. So I would maybe say, if people, I'm not sure if you're allowed to unmute yourself, but if you want to raise your hand as well, and you have a question that you would like to ask directly, we're open to that as well, if you don't want to type it out. But otherwise, please type your questions into the chat. I'm seeing a really great point on in the chat about governance and the importance of government, really coming through with management effectiveness on the different protected areas. This is, the goal of 30 by 30 in so many countries is a huge step up from what currently exists, and especially in terms of the management effectiveness. And so the ambition of 30 by 30 is enormous. Just putting protected areas on the map is obviously not enough. And so it's great to see some countries really stepping up and recognizing the need for strengthening their own institutions and the need for strengthening their finance. And so it's definitely a great point there.
David, I was going to add to that. It's a really good question raised by, I'm going to say your name wrong and forgive me, Kazal. But some of the guidance that's provided in the document is around business planning, right? And as we know, and you point out really well, that simply creating a protected area, that's just the very, very, very beginning, right? And so in order to attract the funding that's needed, in order to make it more effectively managed, to establish the right governance, et cetera, is developing that business plan. And so many public-private funders, as well as investors, are looking for those business plans. And one of the things that I like about the guidance is, for me, just seeing a practical example is always helpful. And in the guidance, there is a link to a database that has examples of protected area network business plans, so that you can actually, look at the Excel document and see how they're doing that. But again, what we're seeing from a lot of investors and funders is they want to see that level of engagement. And there are some resources as well that are provided. A lot of protected area authorities just don't have the right capacity to develop those financial plans. And so there are some recommendations on organizations. BioFin has been mentioned, who provide support to governments in developing those strategies. So thanks for raising that point. Really important.
Yeah, great. And James also has a question on sort of what some common success factors in the case studies. Of course, they cover quite a range of finance mechanisms, but I'm not sure, Kathleen, if you want to opine on some, general lessons.
Sure. And James, that's a great question. And indeed, the fact sheets do range from non-fungible tokens to biodiversity offsets, right? So they are wildly diverse. Taking a step back, I think what we emphasize in the report and the thing I like about it is, number one, don't start with the most difficult, innovative mechanism. And that really simple chart that David showed, I think, is so important. We're all prone to the new and shiny. And yet, as you know, the basics of protected area finance is, what are the simple things that we could do now in order to increase finance? And so I would say start there, number one. The diversification we all know is critical, but let's be honest, many of our protected areas globally still rely on single source funding, and it leaves countries, communities vulnerable. And then the third, and this sounds so boring, but the business planning is so important. Not only in terms of figuring out what you need, not only in terms of attracting the finance, but also that revenue retention is critical. And then the other thing I would say in terms of commonality, James, transparency, of course, is critical, but governance is really important across the board. And as I like to say, it's the least sexy thing, but it's the most important thing as we look at any financial instrument. So starting at that basic and then building out. And the point I'll also make is, and I said this on the green listing, what we're seeing around investors and attracting investors, to David's point, as we know, they need clear indicators. And that's the benefit of a green list, right? Is that robustness of the monitoring, evaluation, and really being able to back up those indicators. And so that does present an opportunity, whether you're talking about a bond or an offset, you've got to have those clear indicators in order to attract funding. And it's something I think, again, we've fallen short on, and there's been great improvement, and the green list is just one mechanism that shores that up.
Excellent. Thanks, Kathleen. Really great point. Camille, you've been quite quiet here. I see James is calling you out there. Any thoughts that you'd like to share, and how maybe the panorama could be helpful with this?
David, thank you. So I would say maybe from some of the case studies that I found, there are more site level, grassroots level perspective. I would say, other than transparency, like maintaining like a very participatory, enabling environment is a key success factor, because you need to make sure the communities participating understand what they're trying to do, what are the key benefits to them, both like socially and environmentally. So actually these kind of enabling factors are also written in Panorama solutions. So for these case studies that I picked, there are full solutions, and in Panorama platform, they have both short versions and longer version of case studies. And if anyone's interested, it really lists out the processes and success factors and lessons learned in the case study. So I'd really recommend looking there as well. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Seeing a few comments and questions coming in. So thank you all again for asking them. There's an interesting question from Madagascar, which of course is close to my heart here, having spent a long time there and been involved in that expansion of protected areas that was planned. So the question is, with the increase in protected area coverage in Madagascar, had a lot of the sites were created but not funded, and so that's led to some failures. And so you're suggesting that the government would be you'd try to convince the government to only approve proposals if there's 5 years of funding. It's an interesting approach. I do want to. I don't know of other countries that have that requirement, but some of the developed countries, for example, will only approve their, like Switzerland, for example, only approves their national biodiversity strategy and action plan when it's fully funded. But that's fully funded by the government. And there are countries like New Zealand, for example, that don't charge any entrance fees or haven't historically charged any entrance fees for the protected areas because the government covers it. They recognize how the sustainable management of those and financing of those protected areas are critical to their economy and to the ecosystem services that provide value to their agriculture and tourism industries. Madagascar is potentially highly dependent upon the ecotourism and the ecosystem services that the parks and reserves provide. The government currently is not providing significant. I was told a year or so ago that they were not providing practically any funding for their protected area networks, and most of it was coming from the Conservation Trust Fund. So I would suggest to the government that they do an economic analysis to show how valuable those protected areas are for the economy of Madagascar, current and future, and figure out ways that the government can provide that security of financing for the protected areas so that the civil society and the trust funds complement government funding, because that is the ultimate balancing act that, Kathleen was saying, we're too dependent upon single sources, and the protected areas of a country cannot be dependent upon only the civil society support that is currently the case for Madagascar. So that would be my suggestion there. And then we have a couple of a question here on transboundary protected areas, which is a really great one. Anybody want to take a go at that?
I just wrote in the chat. I don't know if Camille or Cisco want to jump in. Junior, that's a really great question. We do have some examples, but we don't drill down into that. And I've just put it in the chat. CASA is another good example where they do have a good governance structure. There's been some recent progress in terms of a multi-country visa to help to facilitate nature-based tourism between the countries, because most tourists that go into that region do go into multiple countries. So they've really been trying to facilitate that. The other example in terms of user fees for a particular species, of course, is the Virunga Massif, where there was a revenue sharing mechanism between the three countries that support mountain gorilla tourism. So those would be two examples. But David, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't drill down into transboundary governance / revenue sharing. Again, there are a couple of examples, but it's a really good question, Junior. Thanks. Panorama might have something.
Yeah, Cisco, did you want to share something?
Yeah, just an example, just to add, it's not really transboundary because indeed I just want to share some examples in Coral Triangle, so which consists of 6 countries, so Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Timor-Leste, Solomon Islands, and PNG. So it basically forms, the coral, let's say the Coral Triangle in those 6 countries, because how important it is there, the connectivity between the marine species, in Southeast Asia and Pacific. But indeed, yeah, it's a really long game. Let's say it's a long challenge, and because when we're talking about transboundary, they have a lot of let's say aspects that need to be considered, and especially when it comes to share the governance structure, share the management structure between several countries, so more than 2 or 3 countries. So yeah, it's already complex enough to do. But maybe just one case study from the Coral Triangle itself is that under this initiative for Coral Triangle with 6 countries, they have a system of it's called Coral Triangle Conservation Funds. So basically, a partnership between the 3 governments and how they can look at the seascapes level. So not only one site in Malaysia or one site in PNG, but Papua New Guinea, but it's really to look at the seascapes level of things. So they split into 3 seascapes according to the distance, let's say the physical distance of marine areas. So that's something quite interesting, to look at. It's mostly the private investments, private finance into these conservation funds that also generates, the funding and the grants for the governments and the local authorities to manage their seascapes areas, which is transboundary, but not really in definition transboundary itself. So yeah, so that's just sharing from my side.
Siska, thank you. Thanks for shouting out the Coral Triangle Conservation Fund, which we are just supporting as much as we can. And anyone interested in that, please reach out to either of us for more information and contacts. There's a few questions on manpower and skill and financing. I mean, it all kind of relates. We need rangers, we need staff, we need, and so that's what the funding for nature is really essential for, because to achieve conservation outcomes, we need people working towards those goals. So it's all kind of related to this. And yes, we're going through a really challenging time right now with international development aid being cut, and we need to really use our imagination and a lot of these mechanisms as best we can, and we need to support countries as I mentioned earlier, that countries are uniquely positioned to capture some of the revenues and benefits that nature provides and direct them towards nature conservation. So really, we need to count on governments to understand their role and the importance of nature in their future for their people and for the economy. Question on landscape level costs. We don't in the guide, we don't talk much about landscape level financing, but it is, of course, a huge area of growth. A lot of people interested in landscapes, and of course, we encourage system-based thinking, and landscapes are integral in that. And there's so many players in landscapes, but you're right, it's important to have funding for those institutions that are kind of coordinating and managing the landscape and trying to bring that perspective in. So there are a few examples of that. There's a group working on bioregional finance facilities that could integrate a range of different finance structures. I highly recommend exploring that. And then there's a range of groups working together with one, is it 1,000 landscapes for 1 billion people, that's been exploring different finance approaches as well as common land based in Holland that work throughout the world in different places, integrating finance into landscape planning. So there are some initial efforts there. It still needs more development, but a great promise. Okay, I think we're getting close to the end. I want to just give everyone a time to say thanks. I want to start off by just saying thank you to Vital Sites. Thanks you to Yen and team for organizing this really great opportunity for us to share this document. And I want to thank again Kathleen, Camille, and Siska for sharing your insights and knowledge and opening up the floor to the panel to say their goodbyes.
I'll jump in. Thanks, David, and Siska and Camille. And thanks to IUCN for hosting this and for putting the guidance up. I'll note in the link, the guidance is alongside other incredible guidance that's offered by IUCN on community development and tourism and other aspects. So really hope that this is helpful, and thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, David, Kathleen, Camille, and all colleagues here.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Kathleen, Siska. And nice to see everyone here. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining and for your interest in all your great work that you're doing all over the world. So really appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.